want to start out with a bold statement. I do not like Seinfeld. There, I said it.
No, I don't either.
I know that's going to shock some people here. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I seem to be about the right age. Certainly all my peers were Seinfeld fans. I just never got the humor of it. But if you remember, back in the 90s, back in those decades, it was huge. Seinfeld was huge, and it just seemed that everyone was quoting and talking and sharing about this show. Now, even though I'm not a fan, I will say that people were talking about it so much that the phrases from Seinfeld have now become part of our lexicon. To the point that it is still talked about today in various areas of discussion. Let me give you an example. Yada, yada, yada. This is a phrase that took place before Seinfeld came out, but in an episode called Yada, 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 it was on everybody's lips. Everyone was saying it. Now, if you're not familiar with this phrase or this term, or if you've never seen the episode like myself, this is what it means. According to the internet, it is used as a substitute for actual words where they are too lengthy or tedious to recite in full. For example, here's a quote from the show. So I'm on 3rd Avenue minding my own business, and yada, 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 I get a free massage and facial. And today, the phrase is used, but it's a little bit different. In fact, there's another phrase that means the same thing. I actually saw it on someone wearing a shirt at Walmart yesterday. I was too embarrassed to go up to her and say, hey, can I take a picture of your shirt? But it does mean the same thing, and the shirt said blah, blah, blah. It means the same thing. But I can tell you that saying yada, yada, yada is a little bit more fun. In fact, I would like all of us to say that. So when I point to you, I want you to say, all right, so example, it's going to look like this. Your unconcerned boss calls you into her office, shuffles papers on the desk, looks up and declares, you know how it is, profits are down, costs are high, you're fired. Or how about this one? Your spouse confronts you over the breakfast cereal. Guess what? We've had a few good years, but now the bloom is off the rose. The grass is looking greener elsewhere. Oh, yeah, you know that. Okay, all right. How about this one? Now, your college-bound child picks the weekend before school starts to announce, I've been giving it a lot of thought. I'm not ready for prime time yet. I've canceled college. Yikes. Now, I don't think that's where we thought that this phrase was going to take us. But as we learned last week, this is life. Life and things happen. So I'm going to change things up a bit. I'm going to shift to another word. Whatever. Anyone who's got a teenager at home, anyone who works with teenagers, anyone that watches a teenage-related show knows that this word is the equivalent of? Yes. All right. So instead of saying yada, 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 I would like us to say whatever. So go ahead, give that a try. Say it. Whatever. All right. Now I want you to say it with the attitude of a teenager. Come on. Roll your eyes a bit, okay? Whatever. So, Jan, do you work with some whatever kids? All right. I was thinking so. Saw that. All right. So what might look like this? You say to your teenager, do you want cranberry juice or orange juice for breakfast? Whatever. Okay, how about this? Do you want breakfast or not? Do you want to get up for in the morning? Or do you want to go see a movie? Do you want to see Terminator or Zombieland? Okay, how about this one? Do you want thick crust, thin crust, stuffed crust, spicy crust, or no crust on your pizza? All right. Okay, so whatever is a response not just for trivial and inconsequential choices. It is an attitude that is souring the taste, I say, of our entire life experience. Amnesty International has found that the conditions of prisoners are worse and incidents of mistreatment are on the rise, but by and large, our world has responded. Every night in the United States, 1 million children go to bed hungry and homeless. And the nation's response has been the Chinese government just dammed up the mighty Chang River, formerly called the Yangtze, destroying villages, local culture, priceless and archaeological sites, and fragile and unique wildlife habitats. By and large, the world has responded.
Whatever.
Record rainfall in the valley. Fires all year long in California. Ice caps melting. Bigger and more destructive hurricanes. Extremes of weather. The effects of global warming and climate change are not in the future. They are with us today. And by and large, an apathetic public says, children are being separated from their parents, scarring them for a lifetime, while our leaders call them animals, and by and large, the public says, whatever, actually communicates two different attitudes. One, the first is a demeanor of pure indifference. We don't know, we don't care, we don't want to care. And the second attitude, revealed by a whatever, is more subtle. Faced with megabytes of information, an overload of options, and a deluge of details, we are unenthused and unimpressed. Instead of growing more engaged and involved with our world, our political system, our schools, our church, our community, a whatever attitude shuts down all information details, ignores complexities, turns off particulars. Doesn't sound like I'm just saying yada, yada, yada. And opts for and adopts a philosophy of, we can't change things anyway. So why bother? Why care? Why even try? Newsweek columnist Meg Greenfield has concluded that what we're calling this whatever attitude has found a new tactic in scandal mismanagement among high-profile political leaders. Instead of trying to hush up every little indiscretion that peppers the lives and works of public figures, their spin doctors and handlers have decided to opt for, her words, befuddlement by saturation, a method of diffusing potentially scandalous bombshells. Greenfield, looking at the wall-to-wall scandal stories, filling all of page one of the paper, realized that in the not-so-distant past, any one of these reports would have been considered a catastrophe by itself. Now, however, for both the accused and the general public, it has pretty much been que sera, sera, which in French means
Whatever will be, will be.
Now, if you thought that that quote from Greenfield was current, I actually found that during the time of Seinfeld, and she wrote it in 1998. I think we could add, people say that the current crisis in American government has never been worse, and yet those who study history say,
Whatever.
so I'm going to switch gears again. And I'm going to look at someone who really is on the opposite end of whatever. This month we're talking about the Apostle Paul. And last week we mentioned that November is our defining month. We are looking at the meaning of church, the very definition of the place that you are sitting in right now. And as we learned last week, church is not a building, it is not a denomination, it is a people, a body of believers. You and me who were listening and certainly participating to this message. As we learn, Paul has a lot to say about this subject. He is writing to a community of believers who, as we said last week, need a word of encouragement. And today we find out that it's not a whatever attitude. Paul actually employs a whatever it takes attitude. Rhonda?
I'll be reading from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, and then 13 through 17. As to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, we beg you, brothers and sisters, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as though from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord is already here. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the lawless one is revealed, the one destined for destruction. He opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, declaring himself to be God. Do you not remember that I told you these things when I was still with you? And on to verse 13. But we must always give thanks to God for you, brothers and sisters, beloved by the Lord, because God chose you as the first fruits for salvation through sanctification by the the Spirit and through belief in the truth. For this purpose he called you through our proclamation of the good news, so that you may obtain the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. So then, brothers and sisters, stand firm and hold fast to the traditions that you were taught by us, either by word of mouth or by our letter. Now may our Lord Jesus Christ himself and God our Father, who loved us and through grace gave us eternal comfort and good hope, comfort your hearts and strengthen them in every good work and word. May God add his blessing.
You know, a lot has been said and written and certainly preached about Paul. I mean, even before his conversion on the road to Damascus, he was a whatever-it-takes kind of guy, a real zealot for the faith. And Paul admits he persecuted the followers of Jesus, at least until Jesus said, hey, why don't you do whatever it takes for me? Now, whatever it takes attitude is not easy, especially in our day and age when Christianity is not popular, it's not in the majority. People are really questioning this church thing, and people are saying, well, it certainly is easier to sleep in or do various certain things than to go to church. So I want you to listen to how one preacher said about this text. As Paul sought to preach the gospel in an increasingly hostile and dangerous world, he became keenly aware that there were powerful forces of evil lurking in the world, and sometimes in the foreground. Facing hardship and opposition, Paul didn't shrug his shoulders and mumble, whatever. The stakes were too high, the danger to life, limb, and body, and soul too serious to allow Paul to skip over the details of the gospel story with a quick yada, yada, yada. The Thessalonian Christians had caught on to the magic of the gospel message, but they became fixated on one part of that good news. They became obsessed with the details of the drama that would unfold during the prophesied end times. Paul doesn't dismiss their fears and yearnings with a whatever attitude. Rather, he addresses them directly, takes their issues seriously, counsels, and comforts them. Don't be shaken or alarmed, Paul soothed, but don't be complacent either. Our problem today is not the Thessalonian one of losing our heads or being alarmed. Our problem today is indifference and complacency. We are whatevering life away. So try this one. Our response to the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Whatever.
Our response to an environment that is crying out and flooding and fires and warming and rising waters from abuse and mistreatment. Our response to a church, to a denomination, to a world that is changing is, well, it won't affect me, so
Yada, yada, yada.
instead of whatever. The Bible is calling us to whatever it takes. Look at this image. It is one of the most famous images in the history of Christian art. Michelangelo's fresco of the Sistine ceiling. The creation of Adam, the fourth picture in the center of the ceiling vault, where God lets life flow out into the body of Adam. Now notice something very different about this picture. Everyone knows the two hands do not touch. And if you have noted that God has the head of an old man and the body of a youth. But observe how lackadaisical the lounging Adam is. See how nonchalantly, almost limp-wristedly, Adam stretches out his hand to God, almost as if Adam is saying, whatever. Now notice God. See how passionate God is in reaching out to Adam. See how much energy and force there is in God's reach. It's almost as if God is saying, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. Next time you hear someone say, whatever, immediately counter with, whatever it takes. They might wonder what you mean. Will you tell them? Will you be like Adam and say to your world, whatever? Or will you hear the call of God and say to the world, whatever it takes? Okay, so I'm going to change things up a bit here. And I would like, when I point to this side of the congregation, to say the words, whatever. And when I point to this side of the congregation, I want you to say, whatever it takes. Got it? Okay. Your spouse doesn't want to hear you say,
Whatever.
your spouse wants to hear you say, your neighbor, a single parent struggling to find childcare and keep a job, doesn't want to hear you say,
Whatever.
your neighbor wants to hear you say, your boss doesn't want to hear you say,
Whatever.
your boss wants to hear you say, your kids needing quality time, your time, don't want to hear you say,
Whatever.
your kids want to hear you say, your children's school teachers desperately needing your support don't want to hear you say,
Whatever.
your children's school teachers want to hear you say, your church's kids group needs volunteers. The children of this congregation need leaders to be present with them. They don't want to hear you say,
Whatever.
they want to hear you say, the poor of this valley don't want to hear you say,
Whatever.
the poor, the hungry, those that are called the couch surfers want to hear us say, the world doesn't want to hear us say,
Whatever.
they want us to hear us say, God doesn't want to hear us say, God wants to hear us say, okay, so we're going to bring all this together. I want all of us to say, whatever it takes. Go ahead.
Whatever it takes.
And do it with an attitude like a teenager. Come on.
Whatever it takes.
All right. Good job, Jan. Go. What is church? What is the meaning of church? What is the definition of church? It is a body of believers who are continually saying,
Whatever it takes.
change the world, change the community, change themselves, and certainly change the church. And let me add, I'm willing to follow Christ with
Whatever it takes.
Amen. I'm going to turn things over to others. This will be our opportunity to